Welcome to Creative. I'm your host, Andy Baker, and this show is located at the nexus of creativity and technology. Each episode, I sit down with creatives of all kinds, artists, writers, musicians, designers, directors, you name it, to explore how artificial intelligence is shaping their creative process. How did they get started using AI tools? Where are they now in that relationship? And what do they really think about AI and creation? Let's dive in. In this conversation, I sit down with Rob Dalton, a sharp and engaging creative polymath, and explore the impact of AI on creativity, the importance of human agency and artistic expression, and the existential questions that arise as technology advances. We discuss the balance between leveraging AI tools for productivity while maintaining emotional connections and the essence of what makes us human. We go to some fascinating places and find shared importance in the need for awareness and intentionality in navigating the rapidly evolving landscape of AI. Rob is brilliant and funny, and I think you're going to love hearing what he has to say. All right, so I'm on here with Rob Dalton, and normally I would ask or sort of point out what, a few things about what you do, but you do all of it. I've gone, sort of done the deep dive on the Rob Dalton life, like writer, musician, creative director, marketing, brand work, XR, the two letters that bring us here today, AI. And you even have a new book out, which you introduced me to the word neuroeconomics. So I appreciate that. And so it's really great to have you on here. Would love to just begin, because the whole podcast is about AI and creatives using it. And that's a journey for all of us, myself included. And so I would love to just hear a little bit about how you got to today, what you're doing, and then we'll sort of dive into that journey of when it pinged on your radar and where it went from there.
Excellent. Andy, I'm glad to be with you, and I'm glad that you've launched this. I think, the fact that nobody else had done that bold AI and creative, it's just such a no-brainer. It's powerful, and I think all creatives are struggling right now with what is this tidal wave? What do I do with it? And will I be viable in 5 years? Okay, well, you kind of rattled off a litany there. I understand you also found my songwriting about Skookum, about Bigfoot.
I did indeed. It's very catchy. My daughter was bopping along without listening too closely to the lyrics, so that was good.
Yeah. There's a couple lines in there that probably not for kids. But thank you for that gracious intro. I have been a writer throughout my career. Started as a journalist in Chicago and Indianapolis. Studied journalism and moved to New York to be a rock star, like a young moron. And then really fell into advertising just as a way to pay bills, and ended up kind of being a creative director for clients like Boeing and Microsoft here in Seattle. It's a company town. But, my heart lies in telling stories that create an emotional connection. And I think, that might be a theme you return to again and again on the Creative Podcast, because that might be the last sort of pinnacle of land left to us meat puppets with that rising tide of AI, and that is connecting to one another. And that's the good stuff. So, where I got introduced to AI, go backwards 3-4 years, I was the guy pounding on the table saying, algos will never write a decent poem. They'll never write a symphony. I mean, that we all know that that's nonsense. In fact, can I share the moment that I thought both holy shit, and again, you can swear on creative. Yeah. Okay.
Absolutely.
And also, here it comes. My wife and I had been watching a program called Outer Range, and it was mysterious and weird and kind of fun, but also kind of listless and boring. I said, ChatGPT, please summarize seasons 1 and 2 of the Outer Range in a limerick. Here it comes. On a ranch where secrets lie deep, a Wyoming void starts to creep. With time-bending woes and family foes, it's a slow burn that might make you sleep. And I literally used that limerick to decide, well, I'm not going to continue with this show because I don't want more just random mystery. And so I had a moment of like, well, that's a decent limerick. They're not easy to write being a poet, and it was pointed, concise, and answered my question, which is no, the mystery just keeps getting deeper, and really, who cares? No disrespect to the makers of that program, but so it was ChatGPT, like most, that cracked it open for me, and grudging at first. I mean, the first time I entered a prompt, like most people, I think I asked it to do a Shakespearean take on hippies, which is my wife's and my favorite snack. And it was instantaneous, and it was decent. And I had that feeling of at once excitement and kind of fear. I mean, as a writer, as a creator, to see how just insanely quickly and competently it cranked out something that was pretty decent.
We all have these parameters around which we think that things that make us special, right? And that something like a limerick, okay, that requires some nimbleness of mind and wit to understand how it works, how it fits, a little bit of a twist in there, maybe an element of surprise, and that concision, like we can expect the power to distill, the power to surprise and amuse. And it's funny that you mentioned a limerick. One of my first introductions to the power of this stuff was some guys that I know. They were testing it and trying to get it to do a limerick. And this was in very early days. And it like understood how to do like the first 4 lines, but it couldn't, like the last line ended up being like, I don't know, 30 words long, where it tried to explain what made this funny. And so as an end result, as we know, anything that has to be explained to be funny,
too late,
ceases to be funny. But so, its ability, obviously, to, hit a limerick, it's like those are those moments where you're like, okay, now I need to ask myself what makes us special.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I would maintain that there was a study recently, I want to say it was Nature. It was something pretty respectful. I'm not the best at recalling where I read stuff, especially in these dizzy days. But there was a study that compared human poetry to algo poetry. And by and large, humans preferred the algo poetry. And a friend of mine shook that in my face as proof that, all writers, all creators would be obviated, shortly. And I said, well, most people like crap poetry. Algos tend to write things that are more rhymey and more straightforward, more easily accessible, unlike a New Yorker poem, which is usually nearly utterly opaque.
Yes.
Love the New Yorker. I don't love, unless it's, one of my favorites, like Billy Collins or Mary Oliver. A lot of that stuff is so arcane. But I think where, again, that rising tide, I thought poetry would never be written by algos. That, of course, now that's happening. But I think a poem that captures that sort of ineffable human moment of kind of juxtaposition, of confluence, of revelation that isn't, A plus B equals C. I think that there's still some time left for poets and artists to create work that has a uniquely human bent. That's not going to last forever. But I think for now, like I wrote a poem about Phoebe Bridgers and Phoebe Waller-Bridges, just because it tickled me that they, called Thus Spaketh the Phoebes. And really, I worked on it, and I was so pleased with it. I shared it with all my friends. And I'm like, well, I'm going to throw a careful prompt into ChatGPT and see what it could do. And it was garbage. So I'm like, thank God. I still have some room to run here.
Yeah, well, I think you touched on something that's really important, in that it's not always going to be this way. But that in the end, the algos are predicting what's best to come next, right? That's at the heart of LLMs, is that it has this wealth of knowledge and it's anticipating what should I do next based on the parameters around what I've been asked to do. And so it's writing a product of what everybody wants, or what everyone has said, everyone has produced, that it has in its memory banks, as opposed to perhaps the artists that rise are the ones who write something that only they could do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That is distinctly, not so much distinctly human as distinctly individual.
That human.
Human. Yeah.
Right.
That human. Exactly.
Yeah. Agreed.
And the question is, when does it figure out, or when do the systems give it to the power to, okay, now we can individualize it. It goes hand in hand with the whole, we're heading towards a place where everyone has their own large language model or their own algo.
Yeah.
And it can capture you. I mean, they're already doing that in that you can feed all of your work into your own LLM and tell it like, okay, write a blog entry on this in my voice.
Yep.
And it can get pretty darn close.
It can. So I went through a very busy phase this past summer where I had a confluence of clients and a lot of work that was really interesting to me, none of which I wanted to say no to. And that was the moment when I really started to embrace, and ChatGPT and Perplexity are my go-tos. I've messed around with, a couple of the other ones. Perplexity is pretty good, but ChatGPT, and I do the $20 a month model, and I frankly don't understand if or how it's better than the free one, but I needed it for some image generation. But I do a lot of work with climate tech startups, and they have this big, complex, vital story to tell about how we can leverage technology, new platforms to hopefully save life on Earth. And, I work with climate scientists who have these giant throbbing brains who can write a 20,000 word white paper, but especially with decreasing attention spans, it doesn't connect with anybody. And if it doesn't create an emotional connection with the audience, it's not going to move the needle. So I would say interview a climate scientist for an hour, throw that transcript. I type very quickly, but I don't even have to do that anymore. I record it, dump the transcript, and, prompt generation, we thought was special for a minute. It's not really anymore, but you do have to be careful with how you set up the assignment. But what I found was ChatGPT is like having a fleet of cheerful, competent grad students who are just dying to do your bidding in a flat second. It's, as much as I feel we're, up against some real existential stuff, I love it because it enabled me to, deliver on a dozen fronts. And what I do, what the algo grad students, they create a draft and it's decent. It's as good as, I'm going to say 95% of actual grad students might be able to do in that situation. And where, I guess, similar to what we were saying before, that rising tide, the 5% is a better headline that's more impactful, a better lead. Occasionally it kind of gets off kilter with some kind of wonky phraseology. So really, it's a polished pass and making sure it's as impactful and concise as possible. But that 5% is, going to become 4%, is going to become 3%. And I think we're racing toward a moment when the role of the human is essentially judging which algo response is the one to move forward with. And so as exciting as that is, something vital is lost. We're not creating, we're curating. It's not a generative urge that's being rewarded with new work in the world. It's sitting back and being deluged with decent content and picking this one, that one, that one. As Harari said, your job's not going to be replaced by an algorithm, but it'll be sure as hell replaced by a human using an algorithm. So I feel lucky to have got up on plane, I guess, with my fleet of grad students when I really needed it. But it does put the fear in me a bit in terms of, I guess, the role of human agency in the future of our species. That's a hard left into the seriously existential, Andy. So
no, but
here we go.
Here we go. I mean, part of my thought process is certainly there are plenty of writers and artists of all kinds who say that the struggle is the point. And that's something that echoes in my mind whenever I hop into ChatGPT. It's like, this is easy.
So easy.
Is it supposed to feel this easy? Like I'm taking the time, and we talked about this briefly before, but to really test how good things were getting, I dusted off an old TVA and comic book idea that I had, and because I wanted to test the latest models, including O1, because it's supposed to be a little more deeper in reasoning, more thoughtful in its responses. ChatGPT 4 would have been probably 4.0 would have been just fine, but it was a little more thoughtful, especially when you prompt it and say, take some time, really think it through, be a table full of producers kicking this around for a while and coming up with some ideas. And then now that you've come up with those ideas, now be in a room full of showrunners and kick it around and try to address those notes. And then, okay, what's this going to look like? What's this going to feel like now? And
what was the result?
Unbelievable. Insofar as like it was heavy prompting, like you said, put some, it's not even guardrails. It's just I don't know
Direction.
if you've had, you're giving direction. And I'm sure I'm not the only one. I'm sure you probably have done this as well. You start talking to it like it's one of those grad students. Where you're like, so, we've talked about this before, this character. These are the things that I would like to add. These are the pieces of the history. Given all that we've talked about over all of our conversation, can you come up with like a 1-page breakdown of this character, hitting on the major themes and points? And there it is. And you read it through, like you said, it's a curation thing where you're like, okay, you're most of the way there. But if I had been working with a staff writer and they gave me that, I'd be like, okay, this is good work. Now
Great
work on the
work.
next character. Yeah.
Totally.
And it is not, again, part of my brain just says it's not supposed to be this easy.
Yeah.
But the flip side is maybe it is, in that like the idea came from me, the ideas came from you. And you're moving the chains, you're moving the ball and getting it, but like it can't begin and it can't really end without that curation. But the question is, when
For
is
how
that
long?
not true? Yeah, for how?
Yeah.
And it's the thing, like you touched on a couple of things earlier on, and I just didn't want to lose them. One, that emotional connection. Any good writer has had that moment where the words come out and you're writing it and you feel that emotion well up in you because I fucking hit it.
I
like
got it.
This is going to make people cry.
Mm-hmm.
Or this is going to make people feel what I want them to feel. When or if is AI going to be able to do that? Can it make us cry outside of existential crisis?
Yeah. Well, I think the answer is just when, and as you mentioned before, who, right? I mean, I think there's a lot of people who are maybe less discerning with their aesthetic choices. I mean, there's a lot of garbage on TV and on the radio that a lot of people, I sound like such an asshole, a lot of people love. And I think, already AI can replicate, just about anything in that sort of giant middling range of commercial art. But, we'll see. I mean, I want to go back to something you said, because it's so mind-blowing that you can say to ChatGPT, write a poem in the style of Billy Collins about, a cup of coffee, and it'll give you a different response if you tell it to really, like you said, if you tell it to take your time with it and respond like it matters. And these sort of like human level prompts, the fact that somehow actually encourages the LLM to improve its performance, what the fuck is that?
And when you add into that, and this is the thing that makes me sweat sometimes, this was maybe, 4 or 6 months ago now, where some of the designers say, like, we don't know how it works. It is so complex and it is doing so much of its own thinking. And they were playing around like, what if, it was the equivalent of like, I'm going to, take some electrodes and like trigger a part of your brain just to see how you react. They did that, like just poking at certain pieces of the algo. And they were like, okay, what happens if we give it something to obsess about there? What will it change? And I think it was like the Hoover Dam or something they put in there. And then when they started prompting, every chance it got, it would mention the Hoover Dam. Where it's just like, write me a limerick about, this, that, and the other thing. And, 87 Phoebes this time.
Right.
And then it'd be like, Phoebe went to a dam called Hoover. Like it just worked into everything. And
it's like loading our neuroses into the algo.
Yeah. Where it's like, it's endlessly and infinitely complex and we don't understand what it's doing. And the ability to, at what point does it so replicate what we are that it's indistinguishable?
Right. Can I get existential again? Because that brings up a thought. Like I'm reading a great book called Genesis by Craig Mundy, who was the Microsoft future caster, my creative firm Curation, did some work for his strategic prototyping group, and it got shut down because his job was to try to figure out where's technology in 5 or 10 years. And good luck now. But he wrote this book with Kissinger, of all people, who I guess wrote some 50 books in his day and was, even at the very end, a powerful mind. But what they're talking about in Genesis, among many other things, is that, well, a couple things. First of all, AI is being trained on the human canon. The human canon is rife with, with gross misdeeds, with humans treating other humans horribly. And of course, all the science fiction canon, Her, Ex Machina, The Matrix, you name it, they're being trained on that as well. And so AIs are being trained on human awfulness and human fear of machines and what could go wrong. But the point that they made that I wanted to get to is that, you think about how, Catholic Mass was in Latin, people didn't know what it said, and kind of religion was a black box. You do it because the priest said do it, and that's the end. We're already at a point, and there was a court case that used an algorithm that pumped out a verdict, and they couldn't unpack how it had gotten there. So what Mundy and Kissinger, and I forget the third author, are warning is that we're returning to this sort of black box trust of the algos. And as you said, Andy, the people who created these don't entirely know how they're making decisions. So the more we cede control, and who wants to look at, a Thomas guide to figure out how to get to a new place? So much of it is great, but the frog in the pot of water, it's getting hot up in here, we are ceding control to the point where, and my kids get tired of me talking about Wall-E, but, the majority of the content most people consume is pushed at them by algorithms that are responding to profit motives, not, the betterment of mankind. So the more that humans cede agency to the AIs, and you add to that, we're not sure how the AIs are making decisions. It's hard not to say what can go wrong after every sentence. It seems like a catastrophic path. And when all the major companies making AI are saying we should be careful while they have the hammers down.
Yeah.
Because, if another company gets there first, or China gets there first, or you name it, and I think, this podcast is going to be funny to listen to in a year.
God,
right?
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, that's the impetus for starting to try to talk about it now, because I don't know if it'll be anything other than a coping mechanism. It's like the world in a year. Like you said, you can't project 5 years. What's it going to look like? Because I'm a big believer in why do you fight the war, or why do you fight the battle when the war is lost? But the fight is worth fighting. In my years as an English teacher, in that lesson, I'm blanking on the book, but it's just you continue to fight even though because it's the right fight to fight. My point being that this may be quaint in looking back, but we have to have the conversation now, because in a year's time, we are ceding control. We are in the pot. And I don't want to get too existential in the sense that, like we were talking about, it is an incredible tool. And could it be put to great and wondrous uses in things like science and even in the creative arts? Yes. But like you said, people who are making these things are not going to stop making these things. The profit incentive is too strong, and it's couched in terms of we can't let other countries get ahead of us. But in the end, we make lots of really bad decisions, whether it's with the algorithms that are running social media.
Yeah.
We like the stuff.
We like the stuff.
We get amused by the funny videos that you can make, and I'm as guilty as anybody to jump onto Sora and somebody says something funny and, hey, here's a little video that can go along with what you just said. We are a meme society, right? But, when I talk about this stuff, and you touched on this, that when you talk about your kids, my son doesn't want to hear it, but he knows that this is the world that he's going to grow up in. My wife just tells me, shut up, stop. I want to have faith in the future.
Yeah.
What are our kids going to do? She's a mom, to the end. And my daughter,
a fair question.
Yeah. My daughter is 10.
Mm-hmm.
What's the world going to look like?
Yeah.
And is there a place, and that image that you gave us stands out to me as a musician, as a young moron going to New York City, trying to, why not make your way? But when you can click a button and, you've got programs that'll just spit out another 3-chord song for you.
What happens to human impetus?
Yeah.
Well, there's since the advent of the DVR, I haven't, even though I was an ad guy for many years, I just kind of hate advertising. But now it's pushed at you, right? I mean, we have this Mandelbrot set of streaming services. It's insane how complex and nonsensical it's got. But now they can make you watch ads, so I'm watching ads. And I've noticed that all of the ads for basically, the equivalent of AGI, for algo assistance, share the same pattern. And that is, a human runs into a sticky situation with another human, doesn't want to deal with it, clicks a button, the algo takes care of it, and the human says, right? And the one that comes to mind is, there's a guy, it's like Office Culture send up. He's like, it's like Office Space. He's pissed because someone took his yogurt out of the communal fridge, and he's writing this just, brimstone fire, I'm going to, and he writes this sort of just emotionally driven, angry screed, who took my yogurt? And then there's a button on his keyboard, on his, whatever application he's using that says, friendlyify or whatever. And it rewrites it, he sends it, and the woman gives him his yogurt back, right? And what that is again, it's a celebration of the loss of human agency. And it's being sold like that's the ultimate benefit. And nobody is like, it's like a Black Mirror episode, for fuck's sake.
We are living in a very warped simulation. Like, this version of it is again, we could go on and on about like our willing giving up of agency for comfort, for ease. And this is part of that. And yet there is that duality piece of it where it's like, you are making everything easy. You are making me more productive. You are like the ability to take an idea off the scrap pile and turn it into a 40-page Bible that is fully thought out, and do that in a week when, you take some time to think it through and give them really good prompts. But this is the moment we're in now where we use the tools, but what happens to the kids who grow up with the tools and always have the tools, where it's like the number of kids that I have been around, including my son and his friends who were home just recently, the conversation around, why should I bother if it can do it better? Like the whole 5-paragraph essay is like, okay, I can click one button and it's done. It's going to do it better than me. And of course, the counter argument is always, well, you need to learn the underlying skills. Like we talk about when it comes to, like, we write something, it gets it to a point, but it still needs me to clean it up and sort of imbue it with that human understanding of story that will connect to other humans. But at what point do we say, like, okay, I have that skill set, but that's because I had to toil in the absence of all of the ease to learn and take it all in and fight with it, wrestle with it, be in a writer's room, kicking ideas around with other people to not settle, but come to some, unified vision for what a story should be. But these, the kids now, again, they're in college right now, are talking about like, why do I do that? Like there's underlying skills. Well, the underlying skills, it can do it better.
I have an answer to that. It's that in exploring ideas, exploring language, and getting better at communicating, you're developing a self. You're developing a relationship with your own brain. I read a lot about neuroscience, and there's a lot of fascinating stuff going on. But, there's a stat that pops to mind that I think illustrates, the danger, and then we can get to the potential positive outcome. Kids, a friend of mine works for the UW in policy, and he threw this stat at me the other day. Kids, I think it was last year or recently, spent 1,000 hours less during the year interacting with other humans. And COVID put a real dent in humanity because, all our kids, like you, sure play Xbox. It's the only way you're going to get any, communal time with your team, your class, your people. But, so during COVID, and this is sort of the antidote to that, we said, well, 2 hours a day, no screens. You can sit in the yard and look at the trees. You can go for a walk. You can play guitar. My youngest taught himself to play guitar, quickly passed me. And, in learning an instrument or learning how to write more compassionately, more passionately, more effectively, you are honing a self that influences how you interact with the rest of the world. And this pattern of humans interacting with one another less is going, one way fast. And what's lost, I think, is, you're an educator, Andy. Like, again, I can't believe you teach English to middle schoolers. That sounds like some, Dante level of hell. But, my friends who are educators reported after COVID, a lot of the kids had trouble with just simple socialization stuff. And if you're not getting the reps to learn how to communicate, to learn how to do things yourself, not let the algos do it just because they're better, you are foregoing the development of a vital resource, which is your relationship to your own person, your own brain, your own development as a personality, as a spirit, as as somebody trying to find a meaningful life. And if meaning is constantly being identified and pushed at you, I think there's a tremendous loss of self, to summarize. So again, I keep, and my wife too, she's like, can we not talk about AI tonight at dinner?
Yes.
But I think, there is the possibility that with that free time, and I've noticed this with me, that what would have maybe taken 6 hours of grinding through a 90-minute transcript, finding the beats, starting to stitch it together, having those awesome algo grad students do that legwork. I'm spending a lot more time outdoors with my dog. I'm playing guitar more. I have more time to be present with my kids when they're around. They're both in college. So, I think there is the possibility that with the freedom we gain because of algos and machines doing so much of the heavy lifting, we can, move toward being more calm, present, enlightened humans. But I don't think that's going to be the norm. I think the norm is going to be Wall-E.
And that's where, thank you for that, because you made me hopeful there. In that I felt the same way, in that in an ideal world, this liberates us, and that, human connection, connecting with the people around us. Certainly, there's been plenty written and said about the fraying of the fabric of society, where people staying inside and slaves to whatever algorithms that they love, and getting outside, and using the time to, as opposed to, say, because people always make the comparison when you talk about AI to the advent of the internet and how it created the opportunity to be more productive. And it wasn't that the work week got smaller, it was more was expected about the time that you were in it, that this one has, the AI has the ability to do the same.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, just exponentially so.
Yes.
Insofar as it's different, vastly different, but in the sense that door gets opened again for what do you do with what technology is now allowing you to accomplish.
Yeah, the reason why I bristled there, and I'm glad you said exponential, and I have a friend who he loves to point to the Steven Pinker stuff, and this X many less people every day. The headline can be this many less thousands of people starved, and that's great, and that is a nice trend. And he says, well, everybody freaked out at the printing press, and everybody freaked out at radio and TV and the internet. Yes, but society had time to accommodate those technologies. And by the way, the printing press for its first 20, 30 years was mostly used to print pamphlets about burning witches, and so that analogy falls apart. But the metaphor that always occurs to me is that Christopher Nolan movie Interstellar, and they're on the gravity planet, and there's a shallow sea, and that wave comes by that's like a skyscraper high, and I feel like the advent of AI it's already upon us. It's already influencing almost every decision that's made. It's influencing every interaction we have with our machines and with our media, and we are on the face of this skyscraper-sized wave, saying, oh, well, it's just another technological change and we'll accommodate. But this is unprecedented. And when you combine that with climate change and how quickly that's upsetting all the norms, potentially the societal structures, things like the insurance business is changing rapidly. And they make a lot of decisions based on AI. And it's just, I think it's naive and dangerous to say, oh, this is just like the printing press, because it's happening in a microsecond compared to these previous technological transformations. And we just simply don't have time to accommodate. And Sam Altman himself said, he works with his chatbot, and he says it's, way smarter than me. and it's already here. We are on the wave, and I think it's sort of a hold on and love your loved ones, and try to be cognizant and be as present as you can for what's actually happening, because it's happening that quickly.
Well, and you touch on something there where it's like, okay, the wave is here. And what also gets me when you talk about Sam Altman is we don't even have the best of it, right? They're playing with tools on a daily basis. So when Sam Altman makes a proclamation about AGI is pretty much here, we know how to do it. It's a question of going after superintelligence. He is using a model that we don't have access to yet. Like, they put out, they've released and let people play with O3 because they skipped O2, but he's playing with O4, 4.5. Like he's playing with the next one. And so when he makes comments like that, or when any of them talk about it, it's like, okay, when you issue a warning, best we listen, because you're basing it on what's to come. Because what I have in front of me doesn't, seems more benign, not completely, but like, okay, it's getting that fast, that it's just so quickly, so good. And again, the race is on. It's like everyone is treating it like winner take all. And they all give, they all say, well, we should think about this. But
right.
As you said, the hammers are down. Like,
we should. Yeah.
We should, but not us, you guys, because we want to win.
Andy, here's a stat out of that book, Genesis. The average, this isn't the forward stuff that Sam's looking at. The average AI supercomputer is already 120 million times faster than the processing rate of the human brain. That's now. That's what I can just click a tab and open up, an assistant that has 120 million times the processing speed that I do.
And what happens? Yeah, what happens when that supercluster that Elon is going to bring online, and then you unleash Grok on that, or God forbid you have Zuckerberg and LLaMA being open source, and anybody can build off of that. Just what it's going to be capable of. But that leads me back to where I'd like to end this, which is, we are clearly simpatico on like there are dangers here. They're not coming; they are here. Yeah. What's a creative to do? That we are using these tools, we're embracing them to some degree, we're worried about them, but harkening back to the name of the podcast, we create. So what are we to do with this? Where do we hope things go from here? And what we create, what should we do with it? We're in a moment where what we do with the powers that we have may define a time of becoming, when the world is changing around us, and what it ultimately turns into both contributes to and shapes the time to come. So what do we do with the powers that we have?
Can I quote the Right Reverend Rick Rubin?
Yes, you can.
I don't know if you know this book, Andy, the creative active way of being. I keep it by the bedside. It's not the kind of thing you pour through, but any creative who is grappling with anything creatively, I recommend get Rubin's book. Here's what I think the answer is. The real work of the artist is a way of being in the world. Like, I think we should emblazon that on everywhere, because it's not about, I'm going to write a song without using AI, or I'm going to, or I am going to use the tools and just bring my special polish to it. That tide is rising. And as you say, it's here, and you use the tools or you're going to be out the door. And that's already a fact. Harari wrote that, I think, in Life 3.0. Again, I'm terrible at quotes. But again, that quote that your job won't be taken by a robot, by a human using a robot, we're there. I think that your way of being in the world becomes, always has been vital. I mean, it's sort of a duh. Like all the great Buddhist, Stoic philosophy, where you pay attention becomes who you are in the world. And I think for an artist, for any creative who is grappling with this, I would just caution and remind them to just continue to be curious, and, to notice things, and to schedule time where you have no inputs at all. Like, you and I'm using these tools like a motherfucker, and they're helping me be productive and make money, support my family, and open new doors and blow clients away. That's amazing. But I think to avoid barreling into the Wall-E territory where we're, how nice, to your point. Like, we like things. We like to be comfortable, like a nice comfy chair that scoots around on the air with a big flat screen and a nice nutritional shake. Like, sign me up. But the loss of our relationship to the natural world is why the climate is fucked. The loss of our relationship to our ecosystems, because we live in these comfy little pods. And again, half the planet doesn't have clean drinking water. So, I mean, we need to be cognizant that any conversation is, this vast divide is growing wider. But, for those of us who have the luxury of having access to these tools and this technology, I think it's paramount that we continue to be in relationship to other people and that we hold that as most sacred rather than how quickly can we go, how easy can it get, how little do I have to exert myself to be in the world. I think that's this greased ramp to the matrix, frankly. But the world is, the world needs people to on climate change, like AI might be our last best hope, figuring out things we haven't in terms of carbon removal or different ways to harness energy. And although dastardly fact, I read that whereas we need to reduce our power consumption by, say, 70% to kind of hit the brakes on climate change, AI by itself is going to need 50% additional power in the coming years. So it had better save us because it's sucking down the last of the fuel. But I don't know, is that a fair answer? That was a bit meandering, but I think human connection is where it's at.
Yeah, no, it's a powerful reminder. Like in my more hopeful moments, I come to a place where maybe, just maybe, having all of this artificial intelligence will push us closer together. That it'll make us, because right now it's dividing us, it's turning us against each other. Just, in every algorithm that's, in any bots that are out there putting in comments in any forum, like it is, we're angrier and more bitter and hopeful that it's like we can't, when the algos are doing all of this stuff for us, what do we do with that time, energy, and attention? We look up from the screen because we don't have to look at the screen anymore because we can just say it to the ether and we get our answers. And we can look at each other and be more human and, maybe heal some of the damage that has been done. But you're right. It's a race against, building how many different nuclear power plants and the race for fusion so that we can just power the algos.
Right.
But isn't that the story of humanity? At least in the last couple hundred years, the race between improving the world or destroying it, and everything hangs on the edge of a razor.
It really does. And I do look forward to listening to this in a year, Andy, and seeing how naive or quaint or misguided it seems, because it's happening so quickly that it's sort of buckle in, love your loved ones. And as you say, get hyper local, connect with your neighbors, be in the world and appreciate what we've got, because the world is going to shit, but it hasn't gone yet.
And hopefully the tools, such as they are, empower even more creation that will help us save us from ourselves.
Let's hope.
We'll see. Let's hope. All right. This has been fantastic. Thank you so much for coming on.
My pleasure, Andy. What a fun chat.
All right. And we'll hopefully, we'll get together in a year when we'll see what the world has done to us.
Let's do it in person. We'll do it in person. I'll come sit by my fire. We'll drink a little bourbon, listen to our podcast, and hopefully laugh and not weep.
Yeah. And if we start weeping, we can always just have ChatGPT give us some limericks.
Way to bring it back, brother. I enjoyed every minute. Thanks, Andy.
All right. Talk to you soon.